It's officially the end of an era, or in this instance, more commonly referred to as the end of an error. It's been about a month since the Mitch Marner to Vegas news broke, and whether you're a fan of the Toronto Maple Leafs or passionately root against them, you have to admit they're going to be a very interesting team moving forward. Through Marner's career with the Leafs, they underachieved. However, with his absence, there's now a chance for the organization to turn the page on an otherwise unpleasant timeline. Last year, Toronto managed to put together their best season of the Matthews era, and with him taking on the role as captain and Marner not being the source of blame anymore, comes a new wave of pressure and expectations. But will Toronto manage to deal with all of this? And with Marner out and no replacement in sight, do they still have a chance to be a serious cup contender? Well, today, let's talk about what happened to the Toronto Maple Leafs this past season, the contract stuff with Marner, and whether or not the organization is better or worse without him moving forward. To better understand what brought Toronto success this past year and how they can build off of that, we first need to look back at their offseason to talk about some of the significant changes that they made following their loss to the Bruins in 2024. For years, Toronto had been paying their top 4 best players a significant portion of the salary cap, and because of that, they just weren't getting any results because the rest of their roster continued to suffer because they didn't have any money to allocate to other players. Attempting to change the narrative, the Leafs opted to take a different direction in free agency, adding players like Chris Tanev and Oliver Ekman-Larsson instead of overpaying and re-signing UFA forwards like Tyler Bertuzzi. They also opted to make a big change at the head coaching position, firing Sheldon Keefe and bringing in Craig Berube as his replacement. Couple these moves together, and for the first time in a long time, Toronto was built well at nearly every position. The regular season went better than expected for Toronto, so the team decided to add some serious pieces to make their chances come playoff time a little bit better. They would win the Atlantic Division come the end of the year for the first time since 1999, finishing with a record of 52-26-4, and with that, earning them a first-round matchup against the wildcard 1 seed and their longtime rival, the Ottawa Senators. Because of Toronto's past, a lot of people felt that Ottawa was going to get this thing done even with their inexperience, but Toronto, they had something different to say. The Leafs jumped out to a commanding 3-0 series lead and had some great performances from some of their top players, also winning 2 of these games in overtime, kind of demonstrating that they were a bit more clutch than some other years of the past. While Ottawa did come back and show a bit of resilience winning games 4 and 5, Toronto shut things down in game 6, winning 4-2 and taking down the Senators in 6 games. Coming out of this series, nothing really changed for me in terms of Toronto. I felt like they handled business as they should. Yes, they let go of the rope a little bit, but naturally when you have a 3-0 series lead, I guess you kind of just fall back into bad patterns. But it didn't really change my opinion. They were still a solid team, and going into round 2, they would be facing a much more difficult task that could really show us what this team was all about. Round 2 began with more optimism than usual and even some faint confidence, but there was still an edge of tension hovering over Toronto as they prepared to face one of the most difficult teams in the league, the Florida Panthers. Let's give Toronto a lot of credit. To begin that series, they were fantastic, taking a 2-0 series lead and looking like they had figured the Panthers out. But naturally, Florida, like in many of their series, showed that they are not shy of being the underdog against any opponent. Game 3 turned out to be the turning point of the series, as Florida would steal a win in overtime and then completely neutralize Toronto's offense in games 4 and 5 to take a 3-2 series lead. Toronto would show some fight, grabbing a win on the road in Game 6, but like Leafs teams of the past, they would lay an egg in Game 7 and once again find themselves on the wrong side of history in what could have been a breakthrough moment for the locker room. Toronto's regular season was spectacular, but still a stark contrast from their postseason numbers. But why is that? Well, let's go through a handful of things that I think led to Toronto losing that series against Florida. First, forecheck. For most of the series, Florida controlled the pace of play and forced Toronto into uncomfortable situations. Particularly in Game 7, Toronto was outshot 21-0. You read that right, 21-0 to start the game. And despite being at home, they never managed to play their brand of hockey, which in this instance was the complete opposite of Florida's. Another reason is a tale as old as time for Toronto, something that's talked about way too often: their stars. Matthews and Marner combined for 60 total regular season goals, but in round 2, they each only had one. Just one goal apiece. And I know a lot of people are going to bring up Matthews' injury, but if you're out there and you're playing, you have to be held accountable. And these two just didn't do enough when it came to scoring goals. And fun fact, a lot of people like to chew up Marner for his lack of production in the playoffs, but Auston Matthews against the Florida Panthers only has one goal in 12 games. Let that sink in, because this is a top 5 player in the league who, yet again, didn't really show up in one of the biggest moments of his career. But the last thing, and maybe the most important, is just holding on to leads and closing out games, particularly in Game 3. I highlighted this a bit in my short recap, but they were up 2-0 in Game 3 and just couldn't close it out. And had they taken a 3-0 series lead, we might be having a completely different conversation about their roster, Mitch Marner, and they may have gone on a run that year, because given how Carolina played and how maybe they could have gone up against the Edmonton Oilers, it could have been a different conversation for Toronto. Obviously, it's a stretch to go that far, but one game, it can change the momentum of a series, and Toronto not winning that one kind of did that. But with another season in the books, Toronto would head into the offseason once more trying to figure out what they were missing. With heartbreak hanging over the city, fans yet again were riding a familiar emotional roller coaster. This time, however, there was a bit more to their loss. A dark kind of cloud hanging over the fan base with the Marner contract negotiations and that fear of potentially losing a player who had meant so much to the organization for almost a decade. Amid weeks of swirling reports, negotiations, and potential trades that fell through, news eventually broke. Mitch Marner would re-sign with the Torontomapleleafs, but not exactly. The Maple Leafs would sign him to an 8-year, $96 million extension, but then immediately flip him in a sign-and-trade with Vegas, receiving Nicholas Waugh in return. After 9 years with 657 games played and 741 points, Marner's career in Toronto had come to a close, unable to bring the team a championship during his tenure. With Marner gone, of course, there's going to be a void in the offense, but I think that that's actually a bright spot for the Leafs' future. We've talked about this team not being able to get over the hump, and now that they have some change within their top 6, we're going to see some other guys who have a lot of potential fight to get within this lineup. So let's talk about this as our next portion of the video, the future for Toronto, as well as some of the offseason moves that they made that I'm actually a big fan of. The first move was making a trade with Utah for Matias Maccelli, a player coming off a down year with the Mammoth, but a year prior had 57 points with Arizona. Maccelli is no Marner replacement, but the potential is there, and only giving up a third rounder makes this a low-risk, high-upside move for the Leafs. Other notable moves for Toronto was re-signing Matthew Knies to a rather solid contract, getting Nick Robertson back for another year, and most importantly, locking down John Tavares to a very, very team-friendly deal that will allow the team to sign more help for their top 6 or make a potential trade at the deadline without being held back by the cap. Outside of extensions, though small, I really like these moves that Toronto made. Guys like Maccelli, if he can get back to being that player he was in Arizona, maybe even a bit better, that's going to be a great pickup for the team. Nick Robertson getting that extension and having to prove himself, that's going to breed some nice competition within Toronto's locker room. I just think it's going to be an exciting sort of unknown period for Toronto that fans should really be gathering towards, because it's going to be different than what we've seen in the past. It's not going to be the same 4 guys making over $10 million and not showing up in the playoffs. It's going to be 2 guys making significant portions of the salary cap, a guy who is very humble at this point, taking a hometown discount, and now a top spot that's open and ready for people to compete for. I think that that's an exciting thing for Toronto, and I think it's actually going to make them better in the long run rather than if they had just brought back Mitch Marner and done the same thing. But this is my full breakdown of the Toronto Maple Leafs, easily one of the more active and interesting teams of the offseason, but let's hear it from you guys. How are you feeling about this team moving forward? Are they still contenders in your eyes? Were they ever contenders? And are you happy that they let go of Mitch Marner, or would you have liked to see them bring him back? Drop all that good stuff in the comments below, and if you enjoyed this video, give it a thumbs up and subscribe now. I have a few other pieces of content here for you on the screen to check out if you're bored throughout the offseason. As always, thank you guys for the endless support. I will see you in the next upload.